Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Mulholland, Senior Dairying Technologist at Caffrey, and I'd like to welcome you to this second of 3 CAFRE Calf 2020 webinars. The subject tonight is accelerated growth in replacement dairy heifer calves. The new CAFRE Calf unit was completed a little over a year ago, and at that stage we had planned an open day here at Greenmount about now to demonstrate the unit and the management of the calves with the experience of 1 year's use. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do so due to COVID-19, so we have prepared these 3 webinars based on the new CAFRE Calf unit, with speakers tonight from Trouw Nutrition in the Netherlands and Caffrey's Alastair Boyle. We will be recording tonight's event, and it will be available through our website on Caffrey TV later. There will be links to the website on our Facebook page at the end of the event. Tonight's webinar looks at research into accelerated growth in dairy heifer calves and how we are implementing this research at Caffrey. I would like to mention one specific project the CAFRE Calf House is involved with, the EU Dairy for Future project. This is a dairy farming sustainability project which aims to increase dairy farm profitability and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from dairy farming. Achieving 24-month calving and improving calf and subsequent cow performance and longevity makes an important contribution to both improving profitability and also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. On the screen is a list of our speakers for tonight and the panel to answer questions at the end. The 2 presentations will last about 45 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes at the end for questions. In terms of asking questions, you will have the opportunity throughout the event to submit questions electronically. Laptop users can submit questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Mobile and tablet users can access the Q&A option via the 3-dot icon, which appears when you tap your mobile device screen. Please submit your question using the All Panelists option. We will try to answer as many of these questions as we can after the presentations. So on to our first speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Leonel Leal from Trouw Nutrition based in the Netherlands. Leonel is head of the Trouw Nutrico Calf and Heifer research team at Boxmeer in the Netherlands. Leonel spoke at the Caffrey Dairy Conference this time last year and has continued with his accelerated calf growth research, with the resulting cows from this long-term study now entering their 3rd lactation. We look forward to an update on this very interesting research.
Welcome everybody to this webinar entitled Lifetime Impact of Early Life Plans of Nutrition in Dairy Calf. My name is Leonel Leal. I'm currently leading the team of researchers at Trouw Nutrition on calf and heifer research. Before I start my presentation, I would like to thank the colleagues at Caffrey for this opportunity to share some of the insights, some of the ideas we have as a company in terms of the management of rearing calves. Something which is important for all of us to realize is that during the development or its development, there will be many opportunities in a calf's life where external stressors or stimuli such as nutrition, environmental conditions will lead to a change in terms of metabolism and some physiological differences that ultimately will affect the productivity and health of our dairy cows. And that's why we normally refer to those as windows of opportunity. So it's important to realize that every single decision, every little decision we'll make on farm regarding when to feed colostrum, how much milk we are providing to a calf, when to wean that calf, the environmental conditions that we will provide to the growing heifer, the conditions that that animal is going to face when starting lactation. Every single one of those aspects will lead to a change in the metabolism and will also affect long-term performance of our dairy calves. We have Several examples in literature on how relevant those early life nutritional interventions are in terms of some productive outcomes. For example, we do know that nutrition in the first 2 months of life can have an effect on the onset of puberty on the heifers. We know that nutrition and growth and development during the first 2 months of life also can have an impact in survival until the first calving. Proper nutrition early in life can reduce the age at first calving, and we are most of us familiar already with some of the data, which also points at an increase in milk production when calves are growing faster during the pre-weaning period. But for most of us, the most important part and the most interesting part is how does that happen? Which buttons are we pressing during this development phase stages that are actually going to lead to such a response later in life? First and foremost, it all starts with colostrum. And to myself and to most of the people studying colostrum, we talk about that as being the liquid gold. Now, we'll try to explain in the next couple of slides why we think that colostrum is so important and why this is the first window of opportunity that we have to manipulate the development of a calf. In this first slide, I'm just showing or displaying some of the relationships between immunoglobulins in blood and survival of the calves at our research facility in the Netherlands. Just a brief explanation about the setup. We collect calves for our research from farms around about 50 kilometers far from our research station. And we collect calves somewhere between 24 and 48 hours of life. When every single calf arrives at our facility, we will test them for the concentrations or the amount of immunoglobulins in blood. And what we have seen over the years is that there seems to be a relationship between the concentration of immunoglobulins in blood and mortality at our facility, independently from the treatments that the calves would receive afterwards. So from the nutritional interventions that we would apply afterwards. And what we realize is that when the level of immunoglobulins, for example, was very low, below 800 milligrams per deciliter, mortality rates could be as high as 27%. When that concentration was somewhere between 800 and 1,200, mortality rates would normally average somewhere around 10%. But when mortality rates or when immunoglobulins are above 1,200, then the mortality rates drop to less than 3%. We also receive calves with more than 2,000 or 2,500. And when we get those calves with proper colostrum management, mortality rates in our specific scenario can be as low as 0% in a study. So that's important to retain, and it seems to me that it's quite important to keep in mind that there is a relationship between immunoglobulins and calf survival and calf health. One question that we get quite often in the field is then, if I need to choose the way to feed my calf, which one is better? Should I feed colostrum through a bottle or should I use tube feeding instead? What this piece of work clearly displays is that independently from the feeding method that you adopt at your farm, the level of immunoglobulins that you will find back in circulation will not be affected by the method of colostrum feeding. So either if you use a bottle or if you use a tube, the time to reach the maximum concentration as well as the maximum concentration obtained afterwards was the same between the two treatments. Something also quite interesting was that after placing a marker in that colostrum, and in this case it's acetaminophen, which is a marker mostly used or commonly used to assess gastric emptying, what this group of researchers found was that either or both of the treatments, calf fed with the bottle or with a tube, in both cases, the gastric emptying was pretty similar between the two feeding methods. So the main message that we could retain from this slide is that either by bottle or tube, if the concentration, the quality, and the amount is fixed, you should not get major differences in terms of immunoglobulins in blood. Another very important point that was also clearly studied, and the results are quite clean in this study as well, are relating to the effect of feeding time. And for a very long time, we have been claiming that we should feed calves colostrum as soon as possible. And this data actually displays and shows and even pinpoints the importance of doing that as early as possible. In this study, calves were fed the same type of management or colostrum management, and their colostrum was fed at either 0, 6, or 12 hours. And what the researchers found was that not only the slope or the increase or this maximum concentration of immunoglobulins was reached earlier, but also during the first 48 hours of the study, the calves actually maintain a significantly higher concentration of immunoglobulins. So not only it's beneficial to reach the highest concentration sooner, but also the total amount of immunoglobulins in circulation remained higher if calves were fed right after birth as compared to 6 and 12 hours. Another interesting finding is that even when calves are fed or were fed after 12 hours, they reach the same maximum concentration of immunoglobulins as calves fed after 6 hours after birth. So it seems quite aligned with our previous recommendations that whenever a calf is born, we should try to feed him as quickly as possible. Something also very interesting coming out of that research and from the same group was that there seems to be an effect of delaying colostrum supply and establishment of different bacterial populations. And in this, as presented here in this slide, it was found that as time passed, there was a decrease in the proportion of bifidobacteria and also a decrease in the proportion of lactobacillus related to the fact that we were delaying the colostrum supply in these calves. So delaying the first colostrum meal may delay the colonization of beneficial bacteria to the calf intestines. So it's very important because it seems that not only it's important to ensure the correct amount of immunoglobulins in blood, but also it seems to have a role in the establishment of the microbiome of these cows. Putting some of these aspects together, it seems now more reasonable and clear why back in 2005, when feeding calves either 2 liters of colostrum and 4 liters or 4 liters of colostrum, Faber found that the survival in the first 2 lactations was found to be higher in the group of cows at that time that received 4 liters as calves, as well as when putting the lactation of those 2 groups together, of those 2 first lactations together, you realize that cows that were fed 4 liters of colostrum at birth, they produced, in average, almost 1 ton more milk as compared to their to the other calves, which were cows that were only fed 2 liters of colostrum. So these differences in production responses, these differences in terms of survival, I think they should be and they could be very well linked to some of the potential benefits I've just mentioned in the slides before regarding proper colostrum management. Before I move to the next part of my presentation, I would like to just leave some critical control points that we need to have or should have around colostrum. It has to do with trying to feed, or we should try to aim to feed colostrum as soon as possible. Within 1 hour after birth would be the ideal scenario. Try to feed it at the correct temperature, 29, 40 degrees. We should look and measure quality of colostrum, either by looking at the total amount of immunoglobulin in circulation or using just a refractometer or a Brix equipment. Recommendation is to, in general, for the all-seen calves, to feed them more than 4 liters, ideally within the first hour, and then repeat with a second meal of colostrum after 12 hours. And one factor which is several times forgotten has to do with cleanliness, and that's extremely important. We need to make sure that every single piece of equipment that we are going to use to harvest and to feed this colostrum is as clean as possible, because this first meal is of great importance. And if that first meal is contaminated with plenty of pathogenic bacteria, that will have some repercussions in terms of calf health later on. Next, after we have managed colostrum properly, the next question is, which feeding program should we select for? And in that regard, I think Mother Nature already gave us some clues, and she knows better on how a calf should be fed. Here, I'm just trying to break some myths around calf feeding. And one of them is that for a very long time, we thought that intake capacity in calves was quite low. But as displayed, for example, in this study, even at 4 days of age, calves, although they show a big variation in their intake capacity, you can see that they can manage quite high amounts of milk when they are given that opportunity. You see calves consuming as little as 2 to 4 liters, but you can also have, at the same birth weight and at the same age, calves consuming close to 12 liters of milk per day. So it's quite remarkable to see that these animals, they have such a high intake capacity already early in life. Just taking another data set and looking and comparing calves fed on a restrictive feeding regime as compared to ad libitum fed, you can, again, basically see or find a similar responses as in this later study from the Bassier. Basically, we see that calves, they have a high intake capacity that can go as high as 16 liters per day when they are about 3 weeks old. So that should, or at least to have made us think about what could be then the potential implications of such a restriction when calves are fed basically 1/3 or even less than their voluntary milk intake. One question which was asked was, then what happens if we need or if we leave the calf with the mother or with the cow? And it's quite remarkable to see that when calves are left with the cow and allowed to suckle, as compared to calves which are separated and fed 4 liters of milk per day, the calves that were kept with the cow, they grew 3 times or more than 3 times faster, close to 1.2 kilograms a day, as compared to 300 grams a day of registered in the calves that were separated from at day 1. So this gap in average daily gain in development could indeed be one of those stressors that I was mentioning earlier in my presentation. Something we are also confronted is that if we want to increase the total nutrient supply, most of the times we are also constrained to increase the volume of milk supplied in each one of the mills. Most systems at the moment, we are working with 2 to 3 times feeding a day. So if we want to increase the total nutrient intake during that phase without moving to machines or without feeding calves ad libitum cold milk or some other system, so most of the times we have a need to increase the volume in each one of the mills. But we were afraid, or in the field there was that concern that if you go over 2 liters per meal, 𝐏𝐚𝐧𝐞𝐥 will not have enough capacity, and then you will have a reflux to the rumen, and that will lead to some issues and some problems later on. I think some of those were cleared by research like the one exemplified here, where researchers here found that calves fed milk up to 6.8 liters. They haven't, in a single meal, they haven't registered any leakage to the rumen. With that, I'm not recommending in any means that we should be feeding 6.8 liters per meal to Holstein calves. What I'm saying is that the capacity and the expansion of the abomasum is greater than what we initially thought. And in most production systems, calves fed 2 times 3.5, 2 times 4 liters, they will show no issues or whatsoever. So we can be sure and we can be secure that we can increase the volume of milk supply for more than 2 liters. So we can go for 3, 3.5, 4 liters without any issue. Why is that important? It seems that pre-weaning average daily gain is linked also to lactation performance. And in this table, I summarized some studies, some of the studies out there looking at this effect. The manipulation and the differences created in average daily gain in each study, they are of different magnitude, and that was also associated with also a different milk response in the first lactation. There are milk responses going all the way from 1,400 liters or even zero. Independently from the study, something which I haven't found yet in literature was a study where cows were producing less milk if they were growing better early in life. So I think it's good to retain that the response later in life will vary and will not be exactly the same under every single condition, because also the effects were created due to the different factors. In some cases, was whole milk compared with milk replacer. In other cases, it was just differences in macronutrient composition. So there were many treatments being applied here. But overall, what it seems is that average yearly gain during this phase is linked to an increased milk production in first lactation. So now, just before I finalize, I want to focus on accelerated feeding, which I think it's when we try to get closer to nature. In this slide, I want to just summarize the importance on organ development of accelerated feeding. This is a very famous study where calves were restricted to 600 grams of milk powder per kilo, or to 1.3 kilogram of milk powder per day. Both groups, they had the same birth weight. Calves were enrolled and were maintained under these feeding regimes for approximately 54 days, at which then after they were sacrificed. And by day 54, the difference between the two treatments was of about 22 kilograms in body weight. Something which was more intriguing, more interesting, at least to me, were the differences in terms of organ development. Because when you compare the organ development, for example, of the liver, of the mammary gland, between the restricted and the enhanced fed calves, you can clearly see that calves fed on the enhanced, their liver developed faster than the rest of the body, here represented as a percentage of body weight. But also, this group of researchers, they also found the same response in terms of mammary gland development. So the mammary gland development of enhanced fed calves was about sixfold growing faster than the restricted group. Not only mammary gland and not only the liver were affected, we also saw afterwards, we examined some other tissues for gene expression, and we found that a lot of things were changing and lots of changes were occurring during this phase at different levels and at different layers in the animal. Some of that we have already published, but in general, what we see is that not only the speed of growth seems to be changing, but also the functionality of some of these tissues and organs seem also to be responsive and seems also to be affected by early life nutrition interventions. I would like also to highlight the importance in one study that we have conducted in the Netherlands, a randomized controlled study with 86 female Holstein calves blocked by colostrum intake. So they are basically colostrum twins. After colostrum feeding, they were separated into two groups, a life start group, here what we call the life start group, so an enhanced plane of nutrition as compared to a conventional group. They were fed ad libitum, also water, starter, and straw from day 4. And we also collected many blood samples just to try to track them as they would grow in terms of their metabolic development. Pre-weaning, we saw clear differences in growth. On the post-weaning period, so after weaning, we saw no differences between the two groups in terms of heifer development. So the enhanced calves, they were about 10 kilograms heavier at weaning as compared to the conventional calves, or the life start calves were 10 kilograms heavier than the conventional calves. But after weaning, so from 120 days onwards, there was no difference between the two groups. And in this specific experiment, we inseminated the heifers as a percentage of body weight. We were not focusing on their age. And as soon as they would hit close to 390 kgs, which was 58% more or less mature body weight of the cows in our herd, we would start with the breeding program. What we found by doing so was that if you inseminate these early or fast grower heifers based on their development, that can lead to earlier age at first pregnancy, where the enhanced fed or livestock fed heifers they were got pregnant at 408 days as compared to 424 days for the conventional heifers in first and second lactation, and we also saw then a difference in milk production when looking at the protein and fat and protein corrected milk. In first lactation, the livestock group or the accelerated group, they produced about 900 grams more milk than the conventional group. There was a big milk fat response of about 83 grams per day in the group of fat enhanced diet pre-weaning, so they were producing more fat in their milk. No difference in protein, but no difference in lactose. In second lactation, although not significant, milk production was about 1.3 kilograms higher for the livestock group. It's important to, and I will discuss the most likely why this 1.12 was not significant, because from first to second lactation, we lost some animals, and then the power of the experiment just reduced to some extent. Something also important, again, second lactation, we still saw the response in milk fat production and no differences in terms of protein or lactose. Before I finalize, something which was quite intriguing in this data set, and I think this is one of the first to report this type of differences. When looking at the first, second, and third calving, because we already have cows entering third lactation, and actually all cows already calve for the third time, so we don't have third lactation data set completed yet, but all cows already calved for the third time. And what we see is that at first calving, the survival rates for the livestock group or the enhanced feeding group was about 93% as compared to 88% in the conventional group, but that was not significant. At second calving, the group fed the livestock or the enhanced feeding regimes had, or 77% of those animals, they survived until the second calving, as compared to 64% in the conventional group. A trend there. And in the third lactation, or 56% of the cows fed an enhanced plain of nutrition pre-weaning, they reached the third lactation, as compared to only 39% in the group that were fed a conventional diet. It's important to mention that the personnel managing these animals, they have no clue which animal comes from which treatment. And when they are culling or when animals leave the herd, they don't know from which treatment they are coming. So it's quite interesting to see that survival until third calving seems to be affected by the pre-weaning nutrition regime that these animals received earlier in life. So the take-home messages from my presentation: adequate colostrum intake affects health, growth, and future productivity. Accelerated or intensified milk feeding programs increase pre-weaning growth rates without fattening, so you shouldn't be afraid that your heifers are going to get too fat in the first 12 weeks. The largest growth advantages depend on adequate colostrum intake in low-stress environments, and it's something that I haven't touched in this presentation, but it's also extremely important, is that starter and post-weaning nutrition must complement to maintain these advantages. It's also important to keep in mind that although milk creates a big difference in terms of pre-weaning average daily gain, or at least or mostly in the first month, it's also important to keep in mind that proper management of starter and of weaning strategies is going to ensure that the differences created in the first 4, 5, 6 weeks are going to be maintained post-weaning. Evidence suggests that the greater plane of nutrition early in life leads to an increase in milk production. We also saw that in the experiment that I have also displayed here today. And if heifers are bred by weight and not by age, we can indeed reduce age at first calving by, and here I leave a target of 22 to 23 months. It's something that we are doing more and more in the Netherlands, for example. And I see more and more progressive dairy farmers trying to get closer to these figures. So just to summarize, it all starts with colostrum. So pay close attention to the colostrum management on your farm. Mother Nature knows best, so it's important to define very well and try to understand what's the best for our calves. And last but not least, accelerated feeding can and should be a good solution in most of the dairy herds around the world. So with that, I would like to thank all the collaborators that have been working with us in these projects and with most of the research we conduct. And thank you all for your attention.
Leonel, thank you for an excellent presentation. It is very interesting to see the data you're generating on increased cow survival, for instance, for the lifestyle accelerated growth animals. As I said earlier, viewers can ask questions at any time. Please submit your questions using the all panelists options. Our next speaker is Dr. Alastair Boyle from Caffrey. Alastair completed his PhD at AFBI Hillsborough in 2011 and is involved in all aspects of nutrition for the Caffrey dairy herd, from cows to heifers and calves. Alastair, we look forward to your presentation.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alastair Boyle, and I'm a dairying technologist at CAFRE Greenmount. This evening, I would like to talk to you about implementing management practices to achieve accelerated growth within the CAFRE calf house. My presentation will cover colostrum management, use of transition milk, hygiene in the maternity unit, early life calf management, application of technology, feeding for accelerated growth, growth performance of dairy heifer calves, and practical issues to consider relating to the automatic cow feeder. We all know colostrum management is the cornerstone of success for any calf rearing unit. Colostrum feeding revolves around 4 key pillars, which are quantity, quickly, quality, and the hygiene of feeding utensils. Within the Caffrey Dairy Centre, the calving pen design facilitates the management of the post-calving cow. Through the use of the calving gate and the mobile milking machine, colostrum can be harvested quickly and safely from the cow. Currently, calves are being fed between 3 to 3.5 litres of colostrum as soon as possible after calving. Good colostrum quality contains a high level of antibodies, which the calf requires to attain immunity from disease. At Caffrey, a digital refractometer is used to determine colostrum quality. The result indicated by the refractometer is on a percentage basis. A result which is equal to or greater than 22% indicates good quality colostrum. The bar chart consists of 97 colostrum samples taken over several years from cows within the Caffrey dairy herd. Of these samples tested, almost 90%, that's samples above the red line, were classed as good quality. By carrying out colostrum testing on a proportion of animals, it gives further confidence in the colostrum management feeding program. An important aspect of colostrum management program is to check if the steps, feeding protocols put in place are working. One indirect measurement used to monitor calf immune status is the zinc sulfate turbidity test, which indicates colostrum absorption. Here, a veterinary practitioner will blood sample calves between 2 to 7 days of age, then samples will be sent for analysis. In order to evaluate the effectiveness of the colostrum management feeding protocols at Caffrey, a total of 53 calves were blood sampled by veterinary practitioners from Fairmount Veterinary Clinic during the 2018 winter period. As highlighted in the bar chart, the majority of calves had adequate colostrum absorption. The results suggest the colostrum management protocols in place at Caffrey are good and working in practice. Assessing the effectiveness of colostrum management protocols is an important aspect of calf rearing. Results from testing should be reviewed and monitored in conjunction with your private veterinary practitioner over the calf rearing period. Milk harvested at the first milking is highest in quality in terms of, for example, total solids and immunoglobulin percentage. However, there is still a reasonable quantity of these constituents in transition milk. The aim at Caffrey is to harvest 20 litres, store this, and feed it to the calf over the first 5 days of life. The current evidence suggests that continued feeding of transition milk does aid the calf's digestive development and calf health. If this practice is to be implemented on farm, it is important to have a fridge of adequate size, sealable containers which can be sterilised, a labelling system for each calf's milk, and an easy method to reheat the transition milk before feeding. As high bacterial levels can reduce the uptake of antibodies, it is important to focus on the cleanliness of feeding equipment. Caffrey dairy staff do pay particular attention to the cleanliness of feeding utensils used to either harvest, feed, or store colostrum. A hot water boiler is located in the maternity wing, so all utensils are thoroughly cleaned with boiling water after each use. My colleague Stephen Gilkinson will be covering the topic of hygiene in more detail at next week's seminar. This slide details the management of calves early in life prior to moving on to the automatic calf feeder. On entry to the unit, calves are fitted with a jacket and then are housed in individual pens for the first 6 days. As previously mentioned, transition milk is fed and calves have access to water and calf starter from day 2. It is important to say, by providing concentrates and water at an early stage, this does encourage rumen development in the calf. From day 6, calves are fed milk replacer, and on day 7 they move into the automatic calf feeder. Before I talk about the feeding management of the calves in the automatic calf feeder, I would like to highlight a piece of technology we are using. The Calf Cloud is a software program linked to the automatic calf feeding equipment. This program automatically records all feeding behaviours, for example, milk, concentrate intakes, growth performance in terms of automatic weighing, and calculates daily live weight gains. Data can then be accessed on a smart device, for example a smartphone, or through the Calf Cloud login function. Having this precision data readily available allows for the continuous monitoring of each individual calf's performance. Also, a calf with any health issues identified through a change in feeding behaviour is also highlighted by the system. Our calf rearing stock persons would be accessing this program on a daily basis. Also, the Calf Cloud is important from an educational perspective, as it gives students the opportunity to view, interpret, and understand performance data on calves. At this point, I think it is vital to reiterate getting the basics correct. As previously mentioned, it is important for the calf to fully utilise the growth potential on an accelerated feed plan. The table shows the feed plan for our Holstein Friesian heifer calves. Calves are reared on the feeder for a total of 55 days, with a target weaning age of 62 days. The feed plan has 5 periods, and the feed rate is set at 150 grams of calf milk replacer per litre. In period 1, when the calf first enters, they are offered a total of 6 litres per day for the first 5 days. For the next 10 days, that's period 2, This volume is gradually increased from 6 to 8 litres per day. Then, in period 3, calves are fed a maximum of 8 litres per day or 1.2 kilograms of milk replacer for 30 days. In the final 2 periods, the weaning process starts, with milk feeding reducing from 8 to 1.5 litres over a period of 10 days. Table 1 is a summary of last year's calf performance. A total of 82 Holstein Friesian heifers were reared through the unit in its first season. Calves were weaned on average at 71 days and achieved a weaning weight of 91 kilos, with a daily live weight gain of 0.73 kilos per day. Our aim this year is to further build on these results and to make further refinements to the system, for example, reducing age at weaning and increase daily live weight gain. The data in tables 2 and 3 summarise the current performance of this year's early born Holstein Friesian heifers. Table 2 shows the average performance of the group. One important target in calf rearing is doubling birth weight by 56 days of age. As you can see, calves are more than achieving this target, with an average weight of 77.5 kilos, along with a daily live weight gain of 0.77 kilos per day. From entering the automatic calf feeder, calves were achieving a daily live weight gain of 0.86 kilograms. Table 3 highlights some individual calf performance, and again the data appears to be consistent in terms of calves are more than doubling their birth weight even before 56 days of age. One change made this year was introducing calves to the automatic calf feeder at an earlier age. The two graphs are taken from the calf cloud and show the milk feeding profile along with calf weights. Again, these are key pieces of data which can be accessed from the calf cloud and used to monitor performance. On entering the automatic calf feeder, you can see in the blue bars weight gain increases steadily over the rearing period. Then moving on to the weaning process. During weaning, it is important to minimize any check-in growth and also reduce stress. Furthermore, it is vital to determine the quantity of concentrates calves are consuming. This should be at least 1 kilo for 3 to 4 consecutive days. Concentrate intake is a good indicator of rumen development, and that's why it is important to introduce concentrates to the calf early on. Calves at Caffrey are weaned over a period of 10 days. This is an example of last year's Holstein Friesian heifer calves. The three graphs here represent milk intake, litres per day, concentrate intake as grams per day, and weight as kilos. The weaning process commenced for this calf on the 18th of January 2020. As milk intake starts to reduce from what was 9 litres, this coincides with an increase in concentrate intake, as indicated by the arrows in red. During this period, as you can see, the animal continues to gain weight. In the last week to weaning, calves were averaging 0.76 kilograms per day of live weight gain. Again, highlighting weaning is not impacting on growth rates during this stage. In terms of this year's calves just commencing the weaning process, we are observing good levels of concentrate intakes, these being from 1 kilo and upwards. The data collected by the calf cloud during the weaning process is particularly useful to staff in terms of accurately determining the quantity of concentrates calves are consuming, while also monitoring weight gain over the period. An important management practice carried out within the calf house after weaning is allowing the calves to remain in the pen for a period of 10 to 12 days. This allows concentrate intakes to be further monitored, along with calf health. Good quality silage is introduced near the end of weaning. For weaning to be successful and minimise any reduction in growth, it is important to limit stress and allow the calf to adjust to changes slowly. In terms of daily live weight gain from birth until the first weaning in the post-weaning house, on average last year calves were achieving a daily live weight gain of 0.78 kilos per day. This clearly shows the weaning process is not impacting negatively on growth rates post-weaning. Then just reviewing last year's heifer calves performance to date. These animals are due to be bred this winter. At housing, these animals had an average weight of 357 kilograms with a daily live weight gain of 0.77 kilograms per day at their last weighing, which was the 8th of October. Although we cannot quantify increased milk yield in first lactation and lifetime yield associated with accelerated growth, certainly the data would suggest these animals are well on target to calve at 24 months of age. Just a few practical considerations relating to the automatic calf feeder. When feeding for accelerated growth or in any feeding scenario, do check that the machine is correctly calibrated and dispensing the correct quantity of milk powder. The machine at Caffrey carries this out automatically, and it is also manually checked by staff once per month. Do check the rubber hoses for bacteria buildup and ensure the cleaning cycle is running correctly. And finally, ensure it is serviced on an annual basis. Just to conclude, colostrum feeding, milk allowance, and weaning management are key factors that determine growth and the health of calves. So, ensure a robust colostrum feeding program is in place in terms of quantity fed, quickly, and good quality. Discuss with your vet about blood sampling a proportion of calves to determine if your colostrum feeding program is working in practice. Ensure colostrum feeding equipment is cleaned after each use. If practically feasible, aim to maximize pre-weaning growth through accelerated feeding. Monitor calf performance in terms of growth rates, for example, using a weigh band. And manage calves to minimize any growth check at weaning. For example, monitor concentrate intakes and minimize stress. And finally, maintain the calf feeder and ensure it is dispensing the correct quantity of milk powder. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I will now hand back to our chairman.
Alastair, thank you for another excellent presentation. We'll now move on to the panel session for some questions. Thank you to those viewers that have already sent questions in. If you have any more for Leonel or Alastair or the other members of the panel, please send them in fairly shortly, as we will try to finish the webinar at 9 p.m. or shortly afterwards if we can. I would like to start by welcoming the other members of our panel, Dr. Gillian Scoley, a calf research scientist from AFBI, and Michael Graham, the farm manager from Caffrey. Firstly, Gillian, good evening and thank you for joining the panel.
Hi, Martin.
I know your research background includes ongoing work on calf welfare. Can I ask you what your view would be on the impact of feeding for accelerated growth on calf welfare?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So basically, a calf loves milk and it'll choose it over any other type of feed. And we've seen in a lot of studies where people have looked at accelerated versus normal conventional or restricted milk feed. And calves that are restricted can display a lot more non-nutritive tendencies like cross-sucking, behaviours that you don't want to see, vocalizations. So accelerated feeding can help eliminate that. It can also help in colder weather, and it's closer to nature, as Leonel has said. But there is a big but with that. If we're giving a calf a lot of milk but we're failing to develop their rumen by getting them to eat concentrate or have a look at some forage, then we're going to do them a big failure when it comes to weaning, and we're going to run into a lot of welfare problems then. We'll see a growth check, which we can reasonably avoid in all situations if we're developing the rumen properly as we go along.
Okay, thanks, Gillian. Certainly we need to pay attention to things, as Alastair said, such as the concentrate intake coming up to weaning to avoid checks in growth, etc. Michael, good evening. Alastair included some tips on the management of automatic feeders towards the end of his presentation. Caffrey have been using automatic calf feeders for a number of years. Could you tell us if you've had any practical difficulty with the feeders at Greenmount over the years?
Thank you, Martin. Yes, we have been using an automatic feeder for more than 10 years now in our calf rearing. Really very little problems provided you keep them serviced annually. They have been a big help in getting the larger volumes of milk for accelerated growth in calves into calves successfully, feeding over a 24-hour period. And that has worked very successfully with very little bother with nutritional upsets.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Leonel, you showed us some very interesting data on the increased survival rates of milking cows fed for accelerated growth as calves in your trials. I know that the cows have only reached their third lactation, but in terms of percentage annual herd replacement rates, what impact do you think the accelerated growth feeding will have on replacement rates within a herd?
Thank you, Martin, for the interesting question. Indeed, we need to wait a little bit more to collect more data, but when already trying to make projections on the outcome of our herd dynamics and trying to also understand when all animals will be culled or trying to project that date, we see that the difference between the treatments lies somewhere between 10 and 15%. Our average at the moment is about 3 lactations per cow. So if we increase the life expectancy of or productive lifetime of our cows by 0.3 to 0.4 lactations more, it's something that I wouldn't be surprised looking at the data as it stands today.
Okay, thanks, Leonel, and that obviously will have potential big impacts financially and in terms of things like greenhouse gas emissions going forward. Alastair, this invitation to the webinars has gone out not just to dairy farmers but also to beef farmers. Could you briefly outline any differences between the replacement heifer feeding settings on the automatic feeders at Caffrey and the settings for Holstein bull or crossbred calves?
Okay, thank you for the question, Martin. So yes, there is a different feeding profile for beef animals, which will move to the AFBI beef centre. So these animals will be weaned at 56 days of age. In terms of milk feeding, their maximum milk intake will be 6 litres per day, with a feed rate of 135 grams per litre of milk replacer. These animals are weaned over a period of 6 days, and again, they also must be consuming 1 kilo of concentrate for at least 3 consecutive days.
Okay, thanks, Alastair. Some of the questions coming through from the audience here. A question maybe to Leonel and possibly Gillian. Is there any benefit in feeding calves enhanced levels of milk replacer for longer periods, e.g. weaning at 12 weeks instead of 8 weeks? Could you have a go at that one, Leonel?
Okay, yeah. Yes, that's a very interesting question as well. Thank you. I must say that from my standpoint, I think that the calf will most likely, although we don't have hard evidence on this one, benefit from such a feeding scheme. If we think where those cows are coming from, they would be naturally weaned at 6 months of age. So potentially, by feeding the calf on for a longer time milk, that could lead to differences, for example, in terms of gastrointestinal development, on microbiome programming, and all those sorts of changes. Although we need to come to a balance where we will harvest some benefit, and we need also to understand that we cannot feed those calves continuously or for a very long time on milk. So I'm more at this stage with the information that we have. I defend more that we should try to maximize milk intake for the first 5 to 6 weeks, and then take a good 4 weeks to gradually wean the calves for a weaning age of approximately 9 to 10 weeks. There are research groups that are pushing those weaning ages further in time, but I still I'm more cautious about that strategy. I would still like to see more hard evidence that there is indeed a clear benefit of pushing weaning age to the 12, 13, or 14 weeks, as you can already see in some places around the world.
Okay, Leonel, thanks. Gillian, would you want to add anything to that from the ongoing research at AFBI?
Yeah, well, just really to say that if you feed them on milk for longer, even at a lower volume, it'll reduce the energy drop when the milk feed goes, because they're going to continually be increasing their intake of concentrate. So it's always going to be good for their live weight gain and for their performance in general in the post-weaning period.
Okay, thanks, Gillian. The next one probably for Alastair. A question here, Alastair, on whether there's any figures for the daily live weight gain for calves when they're in the individual pens at Greenmount before they go onto the automatic calf feeder.
Yes, thank you for the question. I suppose the period prior going on to the automatic calf feeder, it is a period where growth appears to be slow to start. And I suppose the key that we're endeavouring to do is to reduce that period and move them onto the automatic cow feeder. Current growth rates over that sort of 7-day period suggesting around that sort of 0.4 to 0.45 kilograms of daily live weight gain per day. It's an area we still are focusing on. But as they are looking at the data last year, I suppose a change we made was to get them moved on to the automatic cow feeder at that earlier stage, because they do appear to grow and benefit.
Yes, certainly that was something we picked up from the review of the data last year. But I think from a practical point of view, some of the staffing difficulties we've had this year, and we're targeting getting heifers onto the automatic feeder at 7 days, but sometimes it's a bit longer due to how many staff we have available to do that. Some other questions coming through. Again, Alastair, could you comment on the milk powder we're feeding and the specification of it?
Yep. In terms of the milk powder we are currently feeding, it is a 16% fat, 26% crude protein. And I suppose just moving back a step, my colleagues and I we did review a number of research papers over the summer relating to specification of milk powders, specifically targeted at accelerated growth. And the evidence did suggest from that feeding a higher protein milk powder appeared to be beneficial in an accelerated growth feeding scenario.
Leonel or Gillian, would either of you like to come in on that?
Well, we normally target between a 16 and 20% fat milk milk fat and 23 to 26% protein. We're usually at around, I think, well, this year actually we've got 12 different milk repeaters on the go because we've got a few experiments going on. But generally the standard is around 16-17% fat and then the 23-26% protein, just because it's because we're a research farm, it's good for us to sort of get a base level of what's most commonly used across Northern Ireland, and then we can look at it as sort of a control.
Yeah, as a calf milk replacer producer, of course, macro composition or macronutrient composition of milk replacers is something definitely of our interest. And we have been moving towards high-fat milk replacers lately. And although the data is not published yet, but I expect it to be published very soon, we actually compared high lactose, high protein, and high-fat milk replacers on automatic feeders. And what I can disclose at the moment, because part of this data has been already published as abstracts in some conferences, is that there is no growth advantage to the high crude protein milk replacers in these systems. But yeah, it depends on many factors that we will describe later, such as the composition of the milk replacer, the planes of feeding, and of course, by manipulating the ratio fat to energy or protein to energy, you can expect that you are also affecting the body composition of the calf. So I think it's going to be quite interesting. I cannot say too much at this stage because it's not published yet, but yeah, just keep posted because we'll have more news early next year.
Okay, thanks for that, folks. Turning to another question here on the management of colostrum. Is there any detrimental effects of freezing colostrum? Leonel, would you have any information on that?
Overall, freezing colostrum is a great practice. In terms of immunoglobulins, for example, and some of those goodies, there will be no major drop in the quality if colostrum is managed properly. Something which needs to be of high in the priority list and high of attention. Point of attention is when we are heating or warming up or thawing that colostrum, because that's the moment where most mistakes occur, and we try to quickly heat the colostrum, and that's the step where we can indeed damage the colostrum after we try to thaw it after freezing. So water bath, slow heating until drinking temperature, and we should of course avoid all those Coca-Cola bottles or any of those strange recipients or devices to store colostrum. That's my major recommendation. But in terms of quality, there is not a big drop in terms of quality of colostrum if it's frozen properly.
Okay, thanks for that, Leonel. Another question coming through maybe for those farmers who either don't have or maybe don't want to invest in automatic feeders. Is it possible to get the same daily live weight gain through feeding twice a day? Again, Leonel, we understand from some of the groups of farmers who have gone over to the Netherlands from Northern Ireland, and they have seen feeding of acidified milk on some of the Dutch farms. Would you have any experience of farmers getting similar accelerated growth rates with just twice a day feeding, or even less often?
Yes, I was. I haven't spent enough time explaining, for example, the data from our own study, but in that study, calves were fed twice a day, accelerated feeding program, and average yearly gain pre-weaning was about 800 grams for the accelerated group. So indeed, feeding calves twice a day, you can reach those 800 grams of growth pre-weaning. There, you can even go further than that. We have also achieved that in other experiments, higher than 800 grams, and farmers are getting better at also getting to those results. I think depending on the system that we have, independently of the system, if we manage properly, we will always be able to achieve those high daily weight gains. We can also have an automatic feeder and not manage it properly and have very poor performance. as well as with bucket feeding, we can also achieve a very high performance. So independently from the feeder, from the feeding method, of course, some are easier to manage than others. You can achieve high average daily gains if you manage calf properly and if you give and put enough care and attention to the animals.
Okay, Leonel, thanks for that. There's a question here coming through about buying dropped calves, etc., and the ability of a farmer purchasing dropped calves to rely on the calf having got the right colostrum, etc. And the panel is or the questioner is asking here, does the panel have any thoughts on how to best control this risk? I think maybe if I answer that one by saying that your best bet, I think, is to try and establish a relationship with dairy farmers that you're buying the calves off, and you've possibly got to work with that farmer to agree what extra value you would put on a calf that has had the same colostrum feeding as a heifer calf would, for instance, because obviously, yes, while that should happen in practice if the cow's calving at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and the farmer looks to see is it a bull or a heifer calf, and if it's a Holstein bull calf and he's not getting much for it, etc., those things have to come into the consideration. There's another question here on opinions on vaccines, etc. I think if maybe I could invite you to come back to next week's webinar where we'll be discussing health in more detail, including vaccinations, etc., and we will have the Caffrey vet from Fairmount Veterinary Practice at the webinar. You'd be in a position to hear more about vaccination next week. I think again, yes, that was about Rotavac, etc. If we move on to another one here, in terms of calf feeding after weaning, in terms of forages, maybe Michael, could I ask you to just comment on what's our practice at Greenmount in terms of the forages fed around weaning and beyond?
Thanks, Martin. Up until weaning or up almost to weaning, we're feeding a good quality straw and a rack for the calves. But for a few days just before weaning, we introduce good quality silage, good quality dry first cut silage. Just for a few days before we wean, get them used to it, and that then is their diet post-weaning and after that. Okay, and maybe Leonel, what would your thoughts be on the feeding of forages to calves around weaning and beyond? I'm just going to describe something that we do currently on our dairy unit and that we find to work very well. During the pre-weaning phase, we feed calves on calf starter and chopped straw. We maintain that same calf starter and chopped straw even for a week or two after weaning. Then we move animals to a different barn when they are introduced to, and we make a transition to what's going to be the grower diet or the grower TMR, which is mainly composed of grass silage and corn silage. We do that transition over a period of at least 4 weeks, so that calves, they have access to the shop straw, they have access to the grower concentrate, and they have also access to the grower TMR. And after 4 to 5 months of age, then they are just on that grower TMR until breeding, and then from breeding onwards, we change the TMR to a lower energy. Just because we already achieved the growth that we needed for the breeding program, and that's basically what we do. Grass hay in that TMR, we will have grass hay and grass silage, quite substantial amounts. Just a little bit of corn, because we always want to restrict the total amount of starch and ensure that they do not grow too fat. So that's basically what we do, and that's a common diet in the Netherlands overall.
Okay, thanks for that, Leonel. A few more questions coming in here about vaccination, etc., which, as I said earlier, we'll leave that to next week. One here on the accelerated growth commenting that it's a very general term. The question is, what daily live weight gain do Holstein calves need to achieve to really exploit accelerated growth, or would be defined as exhibiting accelerated growth? And again, Leonel, could ask you to give your opinion on that.
Yes, that's it's a very interesting question and intriguing as well, because as the more work we do in those pre-weaning calves, we realize that their growth potential is far higher than what we initially thought. I can tell you that in some experiments you will find, and also it has been described in literature, that you'll find calves growing more than 1 kilo per day in the first 2-3 weeks of life, with extremely high efficiencies, because they are also very efficient at converting dry matter from milk solids into body weight gain. If you would ask me, okay, what's then the minimum amount of average daily gain that I should be getting out of my calves to get a response? It's not a yes or no type of system. It's going to be most likely a continuous response, and the better the calves grow to a certain point, the better the response will be. But you can also expect that it's not an infinite response. So there will be a point where it starts to bend, and there will be diminishing returns. That's what I mean. In terms of daily gain, as I said, calves can grow extremely fast and much faster than what they are growing at the moment. But if you want to get and take a rule of thumb, I would say that start by aiming at 700 grams per day and try to push that all the way until 800-900 grams, because that's something achievable in most of the dairy farms, and that's what progressive dairy farmers are aiming at the moment. But the calf has the potential to grow much faster than that. That's the message.
Okay, thanks, Leonel. Folks, I'm aware of the time passing here, and it's now approaching 9:15, so we'll make this next question the last one. And really putting it to yourself, Alastair, if you could comment on the calf starter that we're feeding. Is it a pellet or a coarse feed? And maybe any differences we've seen as far as concentrate intake last year versus this year, etc.?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Currently, we're feeding a coarse calf feed. And I say this year, the calves that are the small proportion of calves that are weaned so far, we have been achieving very good intakes in terms of concentrates coming up to weaning. So on average, calves achieving just over 1.1 kilograms of calf starter. Last year we were feeding a pelleted concentrate, and probably last year we were not getting as high as concentrate intakes compared to this year. I suppose we have made, as we said, we have made more refinements this year in terms of we were feeding a maximum of 9 litres last year. This year we're feeding 8 litres, so that potentially could have an impact on it as well. And I suppose subjectively, our feeling would be that that with having the coarse calf feed, the calves do appear to consume it and do appear to get better intakes in terms of just our experience comparing this year to last year. But I know Hillsborough have done some research, and maybe Gillian wants to comment on that in terms of the 2 different feeding types. But in terms of what we're doing currently with the coarse calf feed, calves are achieving and consuming good intakes of calf starter.
Yeah, thanks, Alastair. We normally feed, we generally always feed a pelleted mix over here, just to try and reduce feed sorting. We've looked a small bit at pellet type, so 3 mil versus 5 mil, and with slightly higher intakes than 3 mil, but we're still looking at the data before we come to any real conclusions about it. But we find the calves consume the pelleted meal very well. Normally at weaning we're getting like 1.5-2 kilos. And sometimes if they're not that keen to eat it, if after they've had their milk feeds, you can give them a handful of it. And I'll always just make sure that they have it in front of them, and that it's fresh and it's clean and it's palatable.
Okay, thanks, Gillian, and thank you to all the panelists. You never like to cut things short, but just we realise we're running over time. I think we've managed to get through the majority of the questions. We'll have a look at the full list. If there's any outstanding ones that we won't get to next week on the health side of things, we'll try and put responses out through Caffrey social media, etc. So at this stage, I'd like to thank firstly our two speakers, Leonel and Alastair, also our panelists, Gillian and Michael, and I'd also like to thank the folks behind the scenes, the Caffrey IT technical team that have kept this event moving so smoothly and been helping some people out who have been having difficulties logging in, etc. And finally, thank you, the audience, for joining this event and asking so many interesting questions. The next webinar in the series will be next Thursday, the 3rd of December at 8 p.m. And our topic will be, as I've mentioned earlier, calf health and hygiene in calf houses. And our speakers will be Aaron Brown from AFBI, with more data from the OptiHouse Research Project, and Stephen Gilkinson from CAFRE. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, this event has been recorded and it will be on Caffrey TV later. It and a range of other Caffrey webinars can be accessed through the Caffrey website or through our Facebook page. As we close the webinar here tonight, we have a short survey that we would ask you to complete to help us improve these events going forward. Some of the comments last week were around asking to see more videos of the calf house, and we will get those produced in due course and put them out through the website and social media, etc. So once the event is completed, please do not shut down your device completely. The survey will appear automatically, and it is just a few quick questions that will help us to improve. Thank you, good night, and I hope you will join us again next week.